Have you ever heard the sound of a tree exploding? Not from lightning and not from dynamite. I am talking about the cold. A cold so deep, so bitter and relentless, that the sap inside the ancient pines freezes solid, expanding until the wood simply gives up and cracks like a rifle shot in the dark. It is a sound that signals death to anything left unsheltered. It was the winter of 1887 in the Montana Territory. History would call it the Great Die-Up. It was the winter that broke the back of the open range, where cattle froze standing upright in the drifts, statues of ice that would not fall until the spring thaw. But amidst that white frozen hell, where the wind screamed like a banshee and the snow fell for weeks without mercy, a fire still burned. This is not just a story of survival. It is not just a story of the ice that coated the plains. It is the story of Elara Vance, a woman running from a life worse than death, and Silas Thorne, a man who had long ago decided that death was the only neighbor he could tolerate. Two souls trapped in a cabin buried beneath 10 feet of snow, fighting a war against the elements, against the past, and against the thawing of their own frozen hearts. Before we step into the blizzard, take a moment to stoke the fire of this channel. If you love these tales of the gritty, untamed frontier stories of love found in the ashes and survival against the odds, then please reach down and hit that like button. Smash the subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss a journey into the past. Share this story with a friend who needs a little warmth today. And I want to know, where in the world are you watching from? Are you safe and warm, or is the winter wind howling outside your window too? Let me know in the comments below. Now pull your blanket tight. The storm is coming. The wind did not merely blow, it hunted. Elara Vance hunched forward over the neck of her mare, her fingers completely numb inside her kid leather gloves. The horse, a sturdy bay named Buster, was wading chest deep through drifts that seemed to have materialized from the air itself. Just hours ago, the sky over the Montana plains had been a bruised purple, a warning sign she had foolishly ignored in her desperation to put miles between herself and the town of Helena. Now the world was gone. There was no horizon, no trail, no sky. There was only the white, stinging particulate of ice that slashed at her exposed cheeks like powdered glass. She had been riding for 3 days. 3 days since she had climbed out the window of her father's estate, leaving behind a silk wedding dress and a future that felt like a prison sentence. Cal Henson, the cattle foreman her father had promised her to, was a man who treated horses with a whip and women with a silence that was somehow louder than shouting. He was a man who believed ownership was the highest form of love. Elara would rather freeze than let him touch her. It seemed, however, that God was inclined to grant her that wish. "Come on, Buster," she whispered, though the wind tore the words from her lips before she could even hear them herself. The horse stumbled. Elara felt the lurch in the pit of her stomach, that sickening drop of a 1,000-pound animal losing its footing. Buster went down. Elara was thrown clear, landing softly in a snowbank that swallowed her whole. For a moment, she just lay there. The snow was surprisingly warm, a soft, downy blanket inviting her to close her eyes. Just for a moment, she thought. Just a little nap. Panic, sharp and primal, spiked in her chest. She remembered the stories of the white sleep, hypothermia. It started with shivering, then confusion, then a seductive warmth that lured you into death. She scrambled to her feet, gasping as the wind drove the breath back down her throat. "Buster!" The horse was thrashing, trying to rise, but his front leg was caught at an unnatural angle in a tangle of buried sagebrush. He let out a scream that sounded terrified and human. Elara fell to her knees beside him, her hands useless blocks of ice as she tried to clear the snow. "No, no, please," she sobbed. The tears froze on her lashes instantly, gluing her eyes half shut. "You have to get up." Buster stopped struggling. He looked at her with a large, dark eye that slowly glazed over as the ice crystals began to form on his lashes. He was done. The cold was too much. Elara stood up, swaying. She was alone. The temperature was dropping so fast she could feel the moisture in her nose crackle with every inhale. It had to be 40 below, maybe 50. The landscape was an alien planet of undulating white dunes. She took a step, sinking to her waist. Then another. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew that to stop was to die. She walked for what felt like hours, though it might have been only minutes. Her mind began to play tricks on her. She saw a warm hearth in the distance, glowing orange, but when she stumbled toward it, it dissolved into a swirl of snow. She heard her mother's voice calling her name, sweet and clear, but her mother had been dead for 10 years. mild hypothermia. Her father's doctor had once explained. After a hunting trip, shivering, mental confusion. She was past shivering now. Her body had ceased its violent shaking. That was bad. That was the end. She stumbled again, her boot catching on a buried log. This time she didn't get up. The snow cradled her cheek. It wasn't cold anymore. It felt like the velvet of her wedding dress. She curled into a ball, tucking her hands between her knees. Cal will be angry, she thought vaguely. He hates being kept waiting. Crack! The sound was like a cannon shot. It echoed through the valley, sharp enough to pierce her stupor. A tree exploding, the sap freezing and bursting the bark. Then a new sound, a rhythmic crunching. Crunch, crunch, crunch. It wasn't the wind. It was heavy, deliberate. Elara forced one eye open. Through the swirling curtain of white, a shape emerged. It was massive, dark and shaggy, a bear walking on hind legs. She tried to scream, but only a croak escaped. The shape stopped. It loomed over her, blocking out the biting wind. It wasn't a bear. It was a man, but he was encased in furs, a buffalo coat that hung to his knees, a coyote fur hat pulled low, a scarf wrapped around, his face leaving only a slit for eyes that were the color of gunmetal. He held a rifle in one gloved hand, a Winchester Mosin 73, the brass receiver dull in the low light. He looked down at her, not with pity, but with a sort of annoyed resignation. "Well?" a voice rumbled from deep within the furs, sounding like gravel grinding together. "You ain't a steer." He slung the rifle over his shoulder and bent down. His hands, encased in massive mittens, grabbed her under the arms. He lifted her as easily as if she were a sack of grain. Elara tried to speak, to thank him, but her jaw was frozen shut. "Don't talk," he commanded. "Save your air." He didn't carry her. He threw her over his shoulder, her face pressing into the rough, musky scent of wet buffalo fur. He began to walk again, a steady, trudging rhythm that defied the storm. Elara drifted in and out of consciousness. She was aware of the man stopping, grunting as he seemingly pushed against the air itself. She heard the jingle of harness. Horses? No, too rhythmic. Suddenly the wind stopped. The roar was replaced by the sound of heavy breathing and the stomping of boots. A door creaked open on leather hinges. Warmth. It hit her like a physical blow, a wall of heat that smelled of pine resin, old tobacco, and curing meat. The man dumped her onto something soft, a pile of furs on a rough-hewn bed. He turned away, shedding his outer layers. Elara lay there, her body beginning to wake up, screaming in protest as the blood started to flow back into her extremities. The pain was excruciating, like 1,000 needles piercing her skin. She whimpered. The man turned back. He had removed the hat and scarf. He was older than she expected, perhaps 40. His face was a map of the frontier, weather-beaten skin like tanned leather, a thick beard streaked with early gray, and a scar that ran from his temple into his hairline. He wasn't handsome in the way the town boys were. He looked like the landscape outside, harsh, unyielding, and dangerous. He approached the bed, pulling a knife from his belt. Elara flinched, trying to scuttle backward, but her limbs wouldn't obey. "Easy, girl," he muttered. He wasn't looking at her face. He was looking at her boots. "Gotta get these off before the rot sets in." With surgical precision, he slit the laces of her expensive riding boots and peeled them off, then the socks. He took her feet in his large, rough hands. His skin was calloused, but incredibly warm. "Frostnip," he diagnosed, pressing a thumb into her toe. The skin was white and waxy. "Not black yet. You're lucky." He stood up and walked to a bucket near the stove. He dipped a rag into it. "This is going to hurt," he said, returning to her. "Going to feel like fire. Don't scream." "I hate screaming." He wrapped the cool, wet rag around her feet. Elara gasped, her back arching off the bed. It didn't feel cold. It felt like he had wrapped her feet in burning coals. Tears streamed down her face, but she bit her lip until it tasted of copper, refusing to scream. The man watched her, a flicker of respect crossing his stoic face. "Good," he grunted. "You got grit. You'll need it." He turned back to the iron stove that dominated the center of the room, a black metal beast radiating life. "Name's Silas," he said, not looking back. "And you're stuck here, missy. The pass is closed. Drifts are 10 feet deep and climbing. Until the Chinook blows, you and I are the only 2 people on Earth." Elara stared at his broad back, the pain in her feet throbbing in time with her heart. She was alive, but as she looked around the dark, weapon-filled cabin, She wondered if she had simply traded one danger for another. The cabin was a fortress built of hand-hewn logs, dovetailed at the corners with a precision that spoke of a master craftsman. Gaps between the timbers were chinked with a mixture of mud and moss, sealing out the gale outside, but the wind still found ways to announce itself, whistling through invisible cracks and making the lantern flame dance in its glass chimney. For the first 2 days, Elara, who eventually managed to whisper her name was Ellie, keeping her surname a secret, did little but sleep and eat. Silas Thorne was a man of few words and even fewer comforts. He treated her recovery like a chore to be managed, checking her feet for gangrene with the same dispassionate efficiency he used to oil his rifle. The cabin was sparse but functional. A single room, dominated by the cast-iron stove, a rough table with 2 chairs, a bunk built into the wall where Elara lay. Above them, rafters hung heavy with cured hams, bunches of dried herbs and tools. The air was thick with the scent of wood smoke, sage and the metallic tang of gun oil. On the 3rd morning, Elara woke to the smell of something savory. She sat up, wincing as her recovering feet touched the cold wood floor. She was wearing a pair of Silas's thick wool socks, which swallowed her ankles. Silas was at the stove, stirring a pot. He looked over his shoulder. "Up," he stated. It wasn't a question. "Eat." He ladled a thick, grayish mixture into a tin bowl and slammed it onto the table. Elara limped over and sat down. "What is it?" she asked, eyeing the bowl. "Mush," Silas said. "Cornmeal, sweat, dried beef. Keeps you alive." He sat opposite her, carving a piece of sausage with his knife. It was a strange sausage, pale and speckled with green herbs. "Boudin," he said, noticing her stare. "Learned to make it from a Cajun fella down in the basin. Rice and pork. Better than the mush." He sliced a coin of it and pushed it toward her. "Try it." Elara took the piece gingerly. It was spicy, rich with garlic and green onion, warming her from the inside out. "It's delicious," she said, surprised. "Don't get used to it," Silas grunted. "That's the last of the fresh meat. The herd—" He stopped, his jaw tightening. He stood up abruptly and walked to the single window, scraping a layer of frost off the glass to peer out. "The herd?" Elara asked softly. Silas didn't answer for a long time. Outside, the wind howled. "The big die-up," he whispered, the words barely audible. "That's what they'll call this. I got 500 head out there. Or I did. Now, I reckon I got 500 ice sculptures." Elara saw the slump in his shoulders. This man, who looked like he could wrestle a grizzly bear, was watching his life's work be erased by the snow. "Can't you bring them in?" Silas laughed, a dry, bitter bark. "Into a 12-by-12 cabin? No, missy. Cattle are dumb beasts. They drift with the wind until they hit a fence. And then they stand there and freeze. I cut the fences yesterday. Let 'em drift. Maybe some will find a draw, a windbreak. But most won't." He turned back to her, his eyes intense. "Why were you out there, Ellie?" "A girl like you, dressed like that." He gestured to the corner where her ruined, fine riding habit lay in a heap. "You weren't dressed for checking trap lines." Elara looked down at her bowl. "I was running. From the storm. From a man." Silas nodded slowly, as if this confirmed a suspicion. "Husband?" "Fiancé, Cal Henson." Silas went still. The air in the cabin seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Henson," he repeated. "Foreman for the Barquet? You know him?" "I know of him," Silas said, his hand drifting unconsciously to the knife at his belt. "A man who enjoys pain. A man who brands his cattle a little too deep. He wanted to marry me. My father arranged it, for land, for water rights." Elara's voice trembled, but she forced herself to look up, meeting Silas's steel-gray gaze. "I chose the blizzard." Silas looked at her for a long moment. The judgment she expected, the lecture on duty or foolishness, never came. Instead, a slow, grim smile touched his lips. "Better to freeze free than live in a cage," he said. "I can respect that." He grabbed his buffalo coat from the peg. "Stay inside. Keep the stove fed. If the fire goes out, you die. Simple as that." "Where are you going?" Elara asked, alarm rising. "To check the root cellar," he said, "and to see if the snow eater is coming." "The what?" "The Chinook," Silas said, his hand on the latch. "Warm wind. Melts the snow. If we're lucky, it comes soon. If not—" He didn't finish the sentence. He opened the door, and for a second, the roar of the blizzard filled the room, before he slipped out and slammed. The heavy timber shut. Elara was alone again. But this time the silence wasn't as terrifying. She looked at the Winchester hanging over the mantel. She looked at the heavy iron stove. Better to freeze free, he had said. She stood up, ignoring the pain in her feet, and grabbed a log from the woodpile. She shoved it into the stove's maw. The fire roared its approval. She wasn't going to die here, and she wasn't going back to Cal Henson. Hours passed. Elara explored the cabin trying to be useful. She found a tin of dried bark shavings on a shelf and recognized the smell immediately. Willow bark. Her grandmother, a woman who claimed to have learned healing from the Cree, had used it for everything from fevers to aching joints. She set a pot of water on the stove. As she waited for it to boil, she examined the cabin more closely. It was a bachelor's space, devoid of softness, but it was organized with a soldier's discipline. The gun rack held not just the Winchester, but a double-barreled shotgun and a heavy Colt revolver hanging in a holster. On the table, a well-thumbed copy of Ivanhoe lay open, face down. She smiled faintly, a cowboy who read chivalric romances. When the water boiled, she crumbled the bark into it, the bitter, earthy smell mixing with the wood smoke. She let it steep, watching the liquid turn a deep amber. The door latch rattled. Silas returned, looking like a snowman brought to life. He stamped his feet, shaking off pounds of ice. He looked exhausted, his face gray and drawn. The cold was a thief, stealing energy with every minute of exposure. "Any luck?" she asked, handing him a mug of the steaming willow tea. He took it with shaking hands, sniffing it suspiciously before taking a sip. His eyebrows rose. "Willow bark. Good for the joints." He slumped into a chair, wrapping his massive hands around the warm tin cup. "Found 3 heifers alive, huddled in the lee of the barn," he said, his voice raspy. "The rest?" He shook his head, staring into the dark liquid. "I'm sorry," Elara said gently. Silas looked at her, really looked at her, seeing not just a stranded girl, but a woman who had made tea and kept the fire alive. "We survive," he said, his voice rough. "That's what we do out here. We survive the winter, and we start again in the spring. My father came out here in '65, told me the land fights back. You just have to fight harder." "Is that why you live alone?" Elara asked, taking a seat opposite him. "Fighting harder?" Silas took a long sip of the tea. "I live alone because people are complicated, Ellie. Cattle are simple. Grass, water, protection. People want things. They take things." He glanced at the copy of Ivanhoe on the table. "Like your Cal Henson." "He's not my Cal Henson," she retorted. "No, I reckon he isn't." Silas leaned back, the warmth of the tea seeming to loosen his tongue. "You know, in the stories, the knight fights the dragon to save the princess. But out here, the dragon is the wind. And the knight," he gestured to his worn buffalo coat. "The night smells like wet dog and beans." Elara laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to startle them both. "I think the knight is doing just fine." "Maybe," Silas grunted, "but knights usually have castles. I've got a log box and a dead herd." "You have a root cellar," Elara pointed out. "You mentioned it earlier." "I dug it deep. Keeps the potatoes from freezing and," he hesitated, "and it has a back way out. A tunnel. Leads to the creek bed. Old trapper trick, in case the Sioux came calling or a bear got too curious." "A tunnel?" "Just a hole in the dirt, mostly. But it's there." He finished his tea and stood up, wincing as his knees cracked. "Get some sleep, Ellie. The wind is changing." "I can feel it in my bones. The pressure is dropping." "The Chinook?" "Maybe, or maybe just another blizzard. Either way, we'll know by morning." He blew out the lantern, plunging the cabin into a darkness, illuminated only by the orange glow of the stove vents. Elara lay in the bunk, listening to the wind. It sounded different now, less like a scream and more like a moan. She prayed for the snow eater. She prayed for the morning. It happened in the middle of the night. Elara was awakened not by a noise, but by a change in the air. For days the cabin had been a sealed vessel against the cold, but now a strange groaning sound came from the roof. A dripping. Drip, drip, drip. She sat up. The fire had burned down to embers, yet the room didn't feel freezing. She climbed out of the bunk and went to the window. The moon was out. The sky to the west was dominated by a massive, dark cloud bank with a sharp, defined edge, an arch that spanned the horizon like a bridge between heaven and earth. The Chinook arch. The snow eater. Silas's voice came from the darkness of the floor where he slept on a pallet. "It's beautiful," Elara whispered. "It's warm," Silas said, standing up and moving to stand beside her. Warm wind from the mountains. It can raise the temperature 40 degrees in an hour. The snow won't last. He was right. By dawn, the screaming wind had been replaced by a steady, warm breeze that felt bizarrely like spring. The sound of the world changed. The sharp cracks of freezing wood were replaced by the constant, rushing sound of water. The drifts, which had been 10 feet high, were slumping, turning into heavy gray slush. But the thaw revealed what the snow had hidden. As the white blanket receded, dark shapes emerged on the plains. Carcasses, hundreds of them. Cattle that had huddled together for warmth and died that way, locked in a frozen embrace. It was a graveyard stretching to the horizon. Elara stood on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the devastation. Silas was already out there, walking among the dead, his head bowed. He wasn't counting his losses. He was saying goodbye. She went out to him, her boots sinking into the wet, heavy slush. "Silas," she said softly. He didn't look up. "Nature gives and she takes," he said quietly. "This year she took everything." "Not everything," Elara said. "You're here." "The cabin is here." He turned to her, his eyes weary. "And you're here, which means trouble is coming." He pointed to the east. The road to town, previously impassable, was now a ribbon of mud cutting through the melting snow, and on that ribbon 3 black specks were moving. Riders. "Get inside," Silas ordered, his voice shifting from mournful to commanding instantly. "Who is it?" "Doesn't matter. Strangers on the range after a storm like this are either scavengers or hunters, and seeing as you're here, I'm betting on hunters." He ushered her back into the cabin and began barring the door. He went to the gun rack and pulled down a second rifle, tossing it onto the bed. "You know how to shoot?" "My father taught me to shoot quail," Elara said, picking up the heavy weapon. "This ain't quail," Silas said, checking the load in his Winchester. "This is a lever action. 40. Kick like a mule. Hits like a freight train. Don't jerk the trigger. Squeeze it." He moved to the window, peering through a crack in the shutter. 3 of them. Big horses, grain-fed. They didn't suffer through the storm. "Is it him?" Elara asked, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Can't tell yet. But the man in the lead is riding a black stallion. Fancy saddle." "Cal," Elara breathed. "He rides a black stallion." Silas turned to him. "Listen to me, Ellie. This cabin is solid oak. They can't shoot through the walls, but they can burn us out. If they get close enough to throw a torch, we're done. We keep them at a distance. Why are you helping me?" Elara asked, tears springing to her eyes. "You could give me up. He'd leave you alone. You could save what's left of your ranch." Silas stopped. He looked at the meager room, the dead cattle outside, and then at the woman trembling, but holding a rifle with white-knuckled determination. "I spent 10 years pushing people away," Silas said, his voice low. "Thought I didn't need anyone. Thought I was strong enough to stand alone. But looking at those dead steers, a man alone is just waiting to freeze. Besides," he cocked the lever of his rifle. The metallic clack-clack loud in the silence. "I never did like bullies." "They're at the gate," he announced. "Get down. Stay away from the windows unless I tell you." From outside, a voice boomed, arrogant and loud. "Silas Thorne, I know you're in there! And I know you got something that belongs to me." It was Cal Henson. The past had ridden through the slush to claim her. "Go away, Henson," Silas roared back, his voice projecting through the thick logs. "Unless you want to join my cattle in the boneyard." "I don't have a quarrel with you, Thorne," Henson shouted back. "Just send the girl out. She's my fiancé. She's confused, sick in the head from the cold. I'm here to take her home." Elara crept to the window, peering out from the floor. She saw Cal sitting on his horse, impeccable in a long duster, flanked by 2 men who looked like they would shoot their own mothers for $1. "I'm not confused," Elara screamed, surprising herself. "And I'm not going with you, Cal." "I'd rather die." There was a silence outside. Then Cal laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "Have it your way, darling." "Thorne, you send her out, or we burn this coop down with both of you inside." "Try it," Silas yelled. He raised his rifle to the firing loop cut into the shutter. Blam! He didn't shoot to kill. He shot the hat off the man to Cal's left. The man yelped, his horse rearing. "That was a warning," Silas shouted. "Next one is center mass." The 3 men scattered, diving behind the cover of the barn and the woodpile. The siege had begun. For the next hour, shots rang out sporadically. Bullets thudded into the thick logs of the cabin, harmlessly lodging in the wood. Silas moved from window to window, firing calculated shots to keep them pinned down. "They're splitting up," Silas muttered, reloading his magazine tube. He shoved the cartridges in. Click, click, click. One is circling back, trying to get to the blind spot behind the chimney. What do we do? Elara asked. She was gripping her rifle, her knuckles white. I can't cover both sides, Silas said grimly. You have to watch the front. If anyone sticks their head out from the barn, you shoot. Don't think, just shoot. I can't kill a man. You aren't killing a man, Silas said, grabbing her shoulders. You're killing the thing that wants to put you in a cage. You're killing the fear. Can you do that? Elara looked into his eyes. She saw her own reflection, wild hair, dirt-smudged face, eyes wide with terror but alive. Yes, she whispered. I can. Silas moved to the back of the cabin. Elara propped her rifle on the windowsill. She watched the barn. A shadow moved. A man sprinted from the barn toward the porch, holding a bundle of burning rags. Elara didn't think. She didn't breathe. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked into her shoulder, bruising her instantly. The shot went wide, kicking up mud at the man's feet. But it startled him. He stumbled, dropping the burning rags in a puddle of slush. He scrambled back to the barn. I missed. She cried. You stopped him, Silas yelled from the back. That's what matters. Suddenly, a crash came from the rear of the cabin. The sound of breaking glass. They're at the back window, Silas roared. He fired 2 shots in rapid succession. Then silence. Silas? Elara called. I'm hit, he grunted. Elara dropped her rifle and ran to him. He was slumped against the wall, clutching his left shoulder. Blood was seeping between his fingers, dark and fast. It's through and through, he gasped, his face pale. Shoulder meat. But I can't lift the rifle. Outside, Cal's voice rang out closer now. Sounded like a hit, boys. Thorne's down. Get the kerosene. They're coming, Silas rasped. Ellie, listen to me. Under the rug. In the center of the room. What? Trapdoor. Root cellar. There's a tunnel. Leads out to the creek bed. Digging it was the only way to keep the potatoes from freezing. Go now. I'm not leaving you. You have to. I can't shoot. No, Elara said. She stood up, her fear evaporating, replaced by a cold, hard anger. She grabbed Silas's rifle, which had a full magazine. You can't shoot. But I can. Ellie, don't. She walked to the front door. She didn't hide. She didn't cower. She threw the heavy timber bar aside and kicked the door open. Cal Henson was standing 10 yards away, holding a lantern, ready to throw it onto the porch. He froze, seeing the girl he thought was broken standing there like an avenging angel. The Winchester leveled at his chest. Hello, Cal, she said. Her voice didn't tremble. Ellie, Cal sneered, recovering his composure. Put that down. You'll hurt yourself. The only one getting hurt today is you, she said. Get on your horse. Take your men and ride back to Helena. If I ever see you again, I won't warn you. Cal laughed and took a step forward. You won't shoot. You don't have it in you. Elara shifted her aim slightly. She squeezed the trigger. The bullet struck the lantern in Cal's hand. It exploded in a ball of glass and oil, dousing his duster in flame. Cal shrieked, dropping to the snow, rolling frantically to put out the fire. His men, seeing their boss on fire and a crazy woman with a repeating rifle, decided they weren't getting paid enough for this. They bolted for their horses. Go! Elara screamed, working the lever of the rifle. Clack, clack. She fired a shot into the air. Cal, his coat smoking and his pride shattered, scrambled onto his black stallion and galloped after them, not looking back. Elara stood on the porch, the rifle smoking in her hands, watching them disappear over the rise. The Chinook wind blew her hair back from her face. She didn't feel cold. She felt like the fire itself. Elara didn't collapse until the riders were gone. Then her knees gave way and she sat down hard on the porch steps. Ellie! Silas's voice was weak. She scrambled up and ran back inside. Silas was trying to stand, using the wall for support. She rushed to him, guiding him back to the chair. You crazy woman, he wheezed, but his eyes were shining with something that looked like awe. You shot the lantern. I aimed for his leg, Elara admitted with a shaky laugh. But the lantern worked better. She tore strips from her petticoat, the ruined remains, of her old life, and dressed his wound. It was clean, straight through the muscle. He would lose the use of the arm for a few weeks, but he would live. They spent the next week in a strange domestic quiet. The snow continued to melt. The Chinook finished its work, leaving the plains brown and wet. One evening, Silas walked out to the porch. Elara joined him. He was looking at the herd again. The carcasses were still there, a grim reminder of the winter's toll. "I'm ruined," he said softly. "Bank will take the land. I've got nothing to offer." Elara looked out at the land. It was harsh. It was cruel. But it was also wide open. It was free. "You have the land," she said. "You have 3 heifers and," she reached into her pocket and pulled out a heavy velvet pouch she had carried from her father's house. "And you have this." She poured the contents into his good hand. Gold coins. Her dowry. Enough to buy 100 head of cattle. Enough to start over. Silas stared at the gold, then at her. "I can't take this, Ellie. This is your ticket to San Francisco." "To a soft life." "I don't want a soft life," Elara said, looking at the man who had saved her, the man who had taught her to survive. "I want a life that means something. I want to be here, with you." Silas closed his hand over the gold, then reached out and took her hand with his. His grip was strong, warm, and gentle. "It's going to be hard work," he warned. "Mud, blood, cold." "I know," Elara said, leaning her head against his uninjured shoulder. "But the winter is over, Silas, and I think the spring is going to be beautiful." They stood there together, on the porch of the cabin that had been a shelter and a fortress, watching the sunset over the thawing plains. The big die-up had taken much, but it hadn't taken everything. From the ashes of the freeze, something new was beginning to grow. Something that, like the pine trees, might crack and groan in the cold, but would never ever break. And so, amidst the melting snows of 1887, Elara and Silas found their redemption. They proved that even when the world freezes over, the human spirit and love can burn hot enough to melt the ice. If this story warmed your heart, if you felt the bite of the blizzard and the heat of the Winchester, then please do me a favor. Give this video a like. It helps us keep the fire burning in the algorithm. Subscribe to Frontier Rescue Stories for more tales of grit, survival, and romance in the Wild West. Check out our playlist on the screen now for more stories of blizzard, rescues, and unlikely heroes. I want to hear from you. What would you have done in Elara's shoes? Would you have taken the shot? Let me know in the comments. Until next time, keep your powder dry, your heart open, and watch out for the snow eater. Safe trails, partners.